Good morning, everybody. Happy Monday to you. It is 10 o'clock. It is time for 10 with Tim. My name is Tim Harris. We do this every day, Monday through Friday. Facebook, YouTube, Spotify, wherever you find us, man. So glad you found us. We just go verse by verse through the Word of God. We're just reading the Bible together. We've been doing it for several years, 10 minutes a day, and we're going to finish the Bible this year. Pretty excited. But that also explains why we're in Leviticus. We're in Leviticus chapters 14 and 15 today, so I hope you read ahead. How you doing? Are you good? Thank you. Love you so much for being with me. I appreciate it. It's going to be a good week, you guys, and it's going to be a good week in the Word, so let's get after it. Leviticus chapter 14 ties very closely with what just followed in chapter 13. But in this case, it's a description of the rituals involved in cleansing or recognizing the cleanness of a person who had been afflicted with some sort of skin disease. We talked about last week how none of these are likely leprosy as we think of it in the modern day, although lepers are referred to in the New Testament a lot, and often leprosy is what they call skin diseases of all kinds, but it's probably not technically the diagnosis of leprosy, and we talked about that a bit last week. It's really interesting here. Notice that these treatments, and none of these treatments, they're performed by priests, not doctors. There's no kind of germ theory or medicine the way we think of medicine, and it's part of what's fascinating here about these rituals for ceremonial cleansing. It's not about healing, and you wonder, if you wonder what all this is about, just understand that in the surrounding cultures, Canaanite culture and much of the ancient world, there were elaborate healing rituals in pagan religions that often involved exorcism or some other kind of magic rites. And we have none of that in the Old Testament. There's none of that. There's no exorcism. There's no magic rite. It's just simply depending upon God through prayer for healing. And I love that, I mean, I know we got, we're dipping one bird in the blood of another bird, and it seems kind of, but I just want you to recognize that actually all of that extra heebie-jeebie, voodoo magic is not here. And that's what's pretty fantastic. All the other cultures would have had these elaborate voodoo rituals, not voodoo, but you know what I mean, magical, and none of that. There's none of that. They're just trying to, almost like a public health inspector, not heal disease, but find it, locate it, and protect the community. Because, of course, it's the spiritual contamination that they fear. When the explanation is given as to why this happens, it really does just simply come down to that, so that the person, the community, so that the tabernacle, none of these things experience spiritual defilement, which could bring the wrath of God, death. And so it's much more of a ceremonial, ritual, spiritual kind of attention here to try to protect the community from this sort of contamination. So at any rate, these rituals, as I said, they're not curative. They're much more just ritual treatments in order to preserve the holiness of the community. They're very elaborate, though, and you got to see that. It's a whole lot more than, all right, you're good, take your temperature, turn your head and cough and say you're good. No, this is elaborate examinations and elaborate rituals, because in many ways, this person is literally passing from death to life, from the spiritual perspective. These are what anthropologists would call rites of aggregation, rituals of aggregation. In other words, what this is about is not curing the person, but recognizing that God has healed them and then reintegrating them into society. It's the reintegration that is happening here. Now, if you'll notice in verses 2 through 9, the first stage is a ritual performed outside the camp. And this is typically, from what I'm gathering, it involved two clean birds that are involved in this ritual. Without going into all the gory details, one bird is sacrificed over a pot of clean water, and the other bird is dipped into the blood of the now dead bird, and then that bird is released. It's got those Day of Atonement, scapegoat kind of implications. None of it's explained here, but we do assume somehow that bird that is released probably obviously because the blood is applied to the person, there's a connection, meant to be a connection with the person and these sacrifices. The bird that dies, no doubt, represents the sparing of the life of the person. Now, this could have been you kind of picture. The bird that is released, either that bird is taking off, into the wild blue yonder, carrying this person's contamination, or it's meant to symbolize the life, go, be free, the return to nature, the return to freedom that is being sought or granted by this ritual. After the rites outside the camp, if the person is pronounced clean, then they are allowed to come into the community and spend 7 days outside their tent. So the reintegration is not complete. It's not complete until that 8th day when they can make a sacrifice in the tabernacle. Notice how all 4 mandatory sacrifices are required here. The purification, the burnt offering, the reparation offering, the cereal offering. The only one missing is the voluntary peace offering, which isn't required here of the person healed of a skin disease. In verses 33 to 53, it's, how to treat a contaminated house. If you come in and find mold, mildew, again, the concern here is a spiritual contamination. What I find interesting is that there's obviously a look forward or a fast forward here. Notice with the skin diseases, we were dealing with tents and camps, but in this case, houses, we're talking about stone houses, and it makes mention to the city. So these regulations are flashing forward to when they actually live in actual houses made out of stone. That's not a part of the wanderings, when they were worshiping in the tabernacle, just to call your attention to that. Verses 54 to 57 are a kind of summary of all of it, and that's how they treated skin diseases. And then what follows is the last chapter here in this whole section of ritual cleaning and contamination. All of these bodily discharges in chapter 15 have to do with emissions, discharges from the sexual organs. So when it talks about in the beginning a man's discharge, the implication is it's a discharge from the penis, from the male organ. Some scholars say, well, it could be hemorrhoids, but it doesn't seem. There's no mention here in the case of the man. There's no mention of blood, and this book loves blood. So if it was blood, they'd have said blood. It's probably more some sort of discharge from, like say, from the male organ, perhaps some sort of gonorrhea, or other kind of discharge. I'm not a doctor in those ways, but this chapter is divided into 4 basic categories, 4 cases that are designated by if a man or if a woman, and basically it's long-term and short-term discharges, either with the man or the woman. So long-term, long-term, short-term. In the case of men, and then long-term, short-term in the case of women, and that gives you the 4 categories. This is the last chapter, and it's kind of interesting because these are natural, in many cases, natural body functions, or at least, the sexual function itself isn't considered unclean or nasty, So why is this in the Bible this way? As far as the male short-term discharge, or whatever, the long-term discharge, the gonorrhea, whatever, that there may be some actual, we can look back now and think, yeah, that's a good idea, but as far as any other emission of semen or the regulation that a husband and wife, a man and woman who have intercourse are, considered unclean until the next evening. What's all that about? Sex itself is not an unclean act, so to speak. So why do they associate it with uncleanness? There are probably several reasons there. Probably you can't, obviously it's very, very hard to regulate sins that are done in private. And so to just make all sex somehow unclean, perhaps helps to regulate other behaviors that need to be regulated that are really pretty difficult to enforce. You know what I'm saying? So just sort of make all sexual acts, considered somewhat unclean. There's no sacrifice involved for purification, so this isn't, skin disease level uncleanness here or anything else. The other question's about a woman on her period. What in the world makes her unclean for that? Again, that's a normal body function. It represents fertility, and in most cases, that fertility is a very desirable thing in the biblical culture. From what I'm reading and from what I think we can all, if you think it through, it's an ancient culture where there are probably many reasons why your typical adult married woman is not experiencing monthly menstruation. Primarily because she's always pregnant. Large families were desired, pregnancy was desired, and so she's always pregnant. And then they usually didn't wean a child for sometimes 2 and 3 years. And so a woman of the age of menstruation in the biblical world is likely not experiencing a monthly period very often at all. Does that make sense? And so this would probably pertain to mostly unmarried teenage girls. And so, like I say, there's probably other reasons for wanting to put uncleanness around that, to sort of, like I say, to regulate behavior. If a man lies with a menstruating woman, for example, that's the best they could probably do to try to regulate what happens at the senior prom. You know what I'm saying? That's mostly going to probably be teenage girls there. And so, again, that's just some speculation that they're trying to regulate something of sexual immorality by making some of these regulations pertain to cleanness and uncleanness. Anyway, I don't know. That's as far as we'll go with that. Pick up with me here tomorrow. We're going to move to the Day of Atonement, which is really cool. Chapter 16 for tomorrow. Chapter 16, verses 1 to 34. Listen, have a great Monday. Weather's crazy, right? This is Kentucky, though, so deal with it. I love you guys. If you're out grocery shopping today, I should see you at Myers. But at any rate, I love you guys so much. Stay in the Word. I'll see you in the morning, Lord willing, 10 o'clock for 10 with Tim. I love you guys. Bye.